fog rolled low across the cobbled streets of Greyminster-on-Thames, muffling the midnight chime of St. Aldwyn's Cathedral. A single lamp burned in the office of Solicitor Edmund Hargrave, its golden glow trembling against the mist. Inside, papers lay scattered as though a desperate struggle had taken place. Hargrave himself sat slumped over his mahogany desk, a crimson thread of blood tracing a path from his temple to the floor. And yet there was no sign of forced entry, nor of the weapon. As dawn broke, Inspector Mallory summoned the one man whose mind might untangle the impossible, Hercule Poirot. Chapter 1. The Solicitor Found Dead. The night air over Greyminster-on-Thames hung heavy with the kind of cold that seeped into the bones and whispered of ill tidings. A mist had risen from the river earlier that evening, drifting in languid tendrils through the narrow streets and coiling around lampposts like pale serpents. By the time the cathedral clock tolled midnight, the fog was so thick that sound itself seemed swallowed by it. Footsteps muffled, carriage wheels blurred. Even voices, usually carried easily through the small market square, died only a short distance from where they began. At the heart of this spectral quiet stood Hargrave and Phelps Solicitors, an unassuming brick building with a slate roof and ivy that clung to its walls like brittle fingers. The firm had been there for 70 years, older than many of the men who now relied on its legal services. And though its facade was plain, the name carried weight in Greyminster, especially the name Edmund Hargrave, senior solicitor, and a man known for his sharp mind, impeccable reputation, and unwavering sense of justice. Which is why the small, flickering golden light glowing behind his office window at midnight was curious. Hargrave was a man of habit, and staying past 10 o'clock was unlike him. 11 was rare, midnight was unheard of. Yet there it was, the pale glow of an oil lamp, shimmering faintly behind the mist-smeared glass panes. Inside, papers littered the floor like fallen leaves, scattered in disarray as if a sudden wind had swept through the room. Books lay open on the carpet. A bookshelf near the wall leaned at an odd angle, one shelf broken entirely. And near the centre of the room, hunched over his heavy mahogany desk, sat Edmund Hargrave. Or rather, what remained of him. He was slumped forward, face pressed partially against a stack of documents, one hand outstretched, fingers curled as though reaching for something just beyond his grasp. A narrow thread of blood trailed from his right temple, following the grain of the wood until it dripped soundlessly onto the carpet below. But the most unsettling feature of the scene, more disturbing than the expression frozen upon Hargrave's once composed face, was the silence. A thick, oppressive silence that seemed almost unnatural, as if the fog pressing against the windows was holding its breath. Inspector Jonathan Mallory stood in that silence, hat removed, coat still damp with fog, staring at the body with a sinking heaviness in his chest. Mallory was not easily rattled. He had seen murder before. Death in all its forms, violent, tragic, senseless. Yet there was something about this room, about the unnatural stillness, that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. The door behind him opened with a soft creak. "Inspector Mallory, sir," came a nervous voice. There's no sign of forced entry. The front door was locked when we arrived, windows too." Mallory nodded stiffly without turning. "And the weapon?" "Nowhere to be found, sir." Mallory exhaled slowly. "Of course it isn't." He stepped closer to the desk, eyes scanning the body, the floor, the surrounding chaos. Hargrave's spectacles lay neatly beside his blotter, untouched. His pocket watch, still in his hand, had stopped at exactly 11:42 p.m. He wore his usual dark suit, waistcoat, and neatly pressed cravat. Everything perfectly ordinary, except for the streak of blood drying across his temple. "Was anything taken?" Mallory asked. "We're checking the files now," said the constable, "but it doesn't look like a robbery." Mallory finally turned, fixing the young man with a stern gaze. "Of course it wasn't a robbery. Robbers don't lock doors behind them." The constable swallowed. Mallory looked back toward the desk and frowned. Something glinted faintly beneath Hargrave's hand. Carefully, he lifted the cold fingers. A small folded piece of paper lay beneath. Mallory retrieved it, unfolding it slowly. The handwriting was jagged, rushed, as if written in haste or fear. 3 words: "He knows everything." Mallory felt a chill that had nothing to do with the fog outside. Before he could speak, another constable poked his head through the door. "Sir, the doctor's arrived and someone else says he was summoned." Mallory frowned. "Summoned? By whom?" The constable shrugged helplessly. "He didn't say, sir." Footsteps approached, measured, deliberate. And then a silhouette emerged through the fog. Mallory's breath caught. A small man, dressed impeccably in a tailored grey suit, with a bowler hat perched neatly upon his head, and a cane held delicately in one gloved hand. His posture was prim, his expression attentive, and his dark moustaches curled upward in a way that gave him both an air of dignity and faint amusement at the world around him. "Monsieur Hargrave?" he asked softly, stepping into the room. "I am told he is no more?" Mallory blinked. "Good Lord, Monsieur Poirot." Hercule Poirot bowed slightly. "Bonsoir, Inspector Mallory." Mallory moved toward him at once. "I didn't send for you." "Ah," Poirot said gently, tapping his temple, "but the deceased did." Mallory stiffened. "Hargrave summoned you. Why?" Poirot looked past him to the body and sighed deeply, something like sorrow flickering in his eyes. "For matters of grave importance," he replied softly, "though I fear I arrive a few hours too late." He stepped forward without waiting for permission, his sharp eyes sweeping over the room. Nothing escaped him. The broken shelf, the scattered books, the overturned vase near the corner, the trail of mud on the carpet near the window. He moved slowly, methodically, with the grace of a man accustomed to reading the smallest details as if they were chapters in a book. "The window," Poirot murmured, kneeling beside it. "Recently opened, though the door was locked. Curious, most curious." Mallory cleared his throat. "We found no marks on the ledge." Poirot glanced up, amused. "A man may open a window without climbing through it, mon ami." Poirot rose, moving back to the desk. He examined the stopped pocket watch, the angle of the wound, the position of the body. "Not a fall," he said softly. "The wound is too precise, the angle too sharp. This was delivered by a small, heavy object, perhaps round, perhaps metal, perhaps—" his gaze drifted. "Nowhere to be found." Mallory stared. "How in God's name did you—" Poirot gave him a patient smile. "The great Hercule Poirot uses not magic, mon cher inspector, only order, logic, the little grey cells." Mallory looked unconvinced but said nothing. Poirot's eyes narrowed suddenly. He leaned over the windowsill, touching the faint grey dust with one gloved fingertip. He rubbed it gently between his fingers, then brought it to his nose, inhaling. "Ash," Poirot whispered, "but not from cigarettes, nor cigars." Mallory stepped closer. "From what then?" Poirot did not answer immediately. His mind was already racing ahead. Instead, he turned toward the body once more. Hargrave's hand had fallen slightly open after Mallory lifted it earlier, revealing something Poirot had spotted but the inspector had overlooked. A faint indentation, ink smudges on the tips of Hargrave's fingers. "He was writing," Poirot said softly, "or attempting to, and not this." He gestured toward the ominous note Mallory still held. This was placed after he fell. Mallory stiffened. By whom? Poirot looked up, eyes dark and sharp as polished obsidian. "That, Inspector Mallory," he said quietly, "is the question of the night." Poirot turned away, cane tapping softly against the wooden floor as he scanned the bookshelves, the fireplace, the walls, the faintly disturbed rug. He touched a broken piece of shelf and frowned. "Someone searched for something," Poirot murmured, "something hidden, and when they did not find it—" He looked pointedly at Hargrave's still form. "They ensured Monsieur Hargrave could no longer reveal it." Mallory stepped closer to the body, jaw tightening. "Poirot! The door was locked from the inside. The key was still in the lock when we broke it open." Poirot did not seem alarmed. "A locked door does not exclude murder, mon ami. It merely suggests creativity." Mallory eyed him skeptically. "Creativity?" Poirot shrugged lightly. "A string, a hook, a tool, a gust of wind, a clever mechanism. Many things can close a locked door without a person remaining inside." Mallory let out a breath. "So you're saying this was staged?" "I'm saying," Poirot sighed, "that whoever killed Monsieur Hargrave wished us to believe something impossible had occurred." He paused, gaze falling once more on the stopped pocket watch. 11:42, Poirot said softly. "The time of death, or the time the watch was forced to show." Mallory stared. "Forced?" Poirot did not answer. He had moved to the far side of the desk, his gaze falling upon a single fallen object that lay almost hidden beneath a pile of papers. A broken fountain pen. Poirot knelt, lifting it carefully. The nib was bent, the base cracked, and near the cracked seam a faint smear of blood. "Voila!" Poirot whispered. He stood holding the pen between thumb and forefinger. "The murder weapon." Mallory's eyes widened. "A pen? But the wound?" Poirot shook his head. "Not the blow. The pen was used before the blow. Look, ink on his fingers. He was forced to sign something, or write something, under duress." Poirot slowly unfolded the jagged note. "He knows everything." "No," Poirot murmured. "This was not written by Hargrave. This was left to mislead." Mallory swallowed. "So the killer staged the whole scene?" Poirot smiled faintly. "At last, Inspector, you begin to think with precision." Mallory looked at the body again, this time with dawning dread. "But then, what was Hargrave trying to write, if this wasn't it?" Poirot glanced toward the window once more, toward the ash, toward the overturned bookshelf. "He was trying to tell us," Poirot said softly, "but his message was stolen." Mallory's voice dropped. "Stolen?" Poirot nodded. "And now, Inspector Mallory, before we proceed further, before we question the living—" He tapped the folded false note gently against his palm. "We must ask a very important question." Mallory braced himself. "Which is?" Poirot turned, eyebrows lifting like twin dark crescents. "Who, mon ami, is he?" The room seemed to shiver around them. The fog pressed harder against the windows. And somewhere far off, St. Aldwyn's tolling bell echoed through the night, long, low, and ominous. Poirot stared at the lifeless figure of Edmund Hargrave. "And why," he whispered, "did he know everything?" Chapter 2. Poirot arrives in Greyminster. The morning fog had thinned by dawn, leaving behind a pale silver sheen over Greyminster-on-Thames. The town, with its narrow alleys and time-worn stone buildings, seemed to wake reluctantly, its windows blinking open one by one, its chimneys releasing wisps of smoke that curled lazily into the cold air. Yet even with daylight softening the edges of night's terror, there lingered unease in the streets. Word of Edmund Hargrave's death had begun to whisper through shop fronts and taverns, carried by deliveries. Servants and milkmen, a solicitor dead in his own locked office. There was no shortage of speculation. Hercule Poirot descended the wooden steps of the Bishop's Arms Inn with quiet precision, adjusting his perfectly tailored cuffs. Though he had arrived only hours before, sleep had eluded him. His mind had been too busy, sorting, categorizing, arranging the clues from the night before into delicate mental files. Disorder troubled him, and Hargrave's office had been a mountain of disorder. The inn's landlady, Mrs. Denning, greeted him with a sympathetic smile as she set tea and warm scones at his table. "Monsieur Poirot, terrible news about poor Mr. Hargrave," she murmured. "He was a good man, always paid his bill on time, never raised his voice." Poirot gave a solemn nod. "A man of order and good conduct, yes, and now he is dead, killed by someone who wished to disrupt that order." Mrs. Denning's eyes widened. "Killed? I thought... Well, they said it could have been a fall, or..." Poirot raised a finger. "Non, madame. He did not fall. He was struck, with purpose." She paled and retreated to the counter, murmuring prayers under her breath. Poirot sipped his tea thoughtfully. At precisely 9 o'clock, Inspector Mallory entered the inn, his boots thudding against the wooden floorboards. He looked weary, as if he had spent the night in argument, with his men, with paperwork, or with the facts themselves. "Poirot," Mallory called, approaching the table. "We've identified the last person to see Hargrave alive. His clerk, Miss Clara Dawes. She's waiting for us at the office." Poirot dabbed his lips delicately with a napkin. "Très bien. Let us go, Inspector. The truth waits for no one." The law offices of Hargrave and Phelps appeared even grimmer in the morning light. Shadows clung to the corners of the corridor, stubborn remnants of the prior night's dread. Miss Clara Dawes sat at her small clerical desk, hands clasped tightly together. Her brown hair was pinned neatly, but a few strands had escaped, giving her a nervous, frazzled appearance. She stood when Poirot and Mallory entered. "Inspector, Monsieur Poirot," she murmured, voice trembling. I'm still in shock. Mr. Hargrave was kind to me, strict but fair." Poirot approached her gently. "Mademoiselle, please, sit. We will trouble you only with questions that are necessary." Clara nodded, lowering herself carefully. Mallory stepped forward. "Miss Dawes, you said you heard Mr. Hargrave arguing last night." Clara swallowed. "Yes, around 10. I had stayed late to finish copying documents. His door was closed, but he raised his voice. I couldn't make out what he was saying. Only that he sounded frightened." Poirot leaned forward. "And the other voice, did you hear it?" Clara shook her head quickly. "No, sir. I heard only him, but I thought I heard footsteps afterward. Someone leaving quickly." Mallory frowned. "Leaving? But no one else was recorded entering or exiting." Poirot tapped his chin. "Mademoiselle, you left soon after the argument." "Yes. I stepped outside to lock the door, and Mr. Hargrave, he did not come after me. He always checked the lock. It was unusual. Unusual behavior," Poirot repeated softly. "A man of habit-breaking habit. This tells us something." Mallory crossed his arms. "You think he was expecting trouble?" Poirot gave a faint smile. "More than that. He was preparing for it." He turned back to Clara. "Tell me, mademoiselle, had Monsieur Hargrave seemed troubled in recent weeks?" Clara hesitated. "Yes, very. He kept his office locked constantly. He made me swear to touch none of his personal files. And he warned me once, only once, that if anything happened to him, the truth was somewhere in his study." Poirot's eyes sharpened. Somewhere. Did he say where? No. She shook her head. But he said it was hidden where only a man with patience could find it. Mallory sighed. That could be anywhere. Poirot gave a soft chuckle. But not for me, Inspector. I am trespassant. He rose from Clara's desk and walked down the corridor toward Hargrave's office. Mallory followed reluctantly. Clara stayed behind, wringing her hands. Poirot entered the office and paused, breathing in deeply. The air still carried the faint scent of burnt ash, the mysterious powder on the windowsill. He walked toward it again, studying the sill with meticulous care. "There is something theatrical about this ash," Poirot murmured. "It is placed, not spilled, a message, but for whom?" Mallory joined him. "You think Hargrave tried to signal something?" Poirot shook his head. "No, this ash was not for Hargrave to leave. It was for the killer to leave. A symbol. But of what?" He paced, studying every inch of the room. With slow, careful movements, he repositioned a few books, lifted overturned papers, paused at the broken shelf, examined scratches near the window frame. Then he stopped. On the floor, half hidden beneath Hargrave's fallen overcoat, lay a small metallic object. Poirot bent down, retrieving it between two gloved fingers. A cufflink, silver, engraved, polished, but more importantly, marked with initials. J.B. Mallory's eyes widened. "James Blackwell." Poirot nodded. The rival attorney, known for ambition, competition, and a rather inflated view of himself. Such a man would wear cufflinks engraved with his own initials. Mallory let out a breath, but he claims he wasn't here. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Ah, but the evidence says otherwise. A man may lie, Inspector, but his clothing rarely does." He studied the cufflink a moment longer, then slipped it delicately into an evidence pouch. "But," Poirot continued quietly, "we must not allow ourselves to be misled too easily. A clue this obvious may be meant to deceive." Mallory stiffened. "You think it could be planted?" "Yes," Poirot said calmly, "or it could be genuine. That is the nature of clever criminals. They create doubt, confusion, disorder." Poirot walked toward the desk, where the false note still lay. "He knows everything." Poirot stared at the words a long moment, his moustaches twitching thoughtfully. "This note is not what it claims to be. It is not a warning from Hargrave. It is a threat from the murderer." Mallory frowned. "Then why leave it?" Poirot gave a small smile. "To tell us precisely what the murderer feared. A man kills not out of courage, but out of fear. Find the fear, Inspector, and you find the motive." He turned sharply toward the door. "Come, we must speak with Mr. Blackwell. And after that, Lady Evelyn Marchmont." Mallory blinked. "Hargrave's fiancée?" Poirot nodded. "Yes, because, mon ami, the dead man's heart, like his office, holds its own secrets." He stepped into the corridor, his cane tapping rhythmically. Let us see which of the living trembles when confronted with the truth. Chapter 3. Footprints in the Mist. A pallid dawn crept over Amberley Court, pale and watchful, as if reluctant to cast full light upon the sins buried in the night before. Poirot stood by the drawing-room window, hands clasped behind his back, observing the dew-slick gardens with a contemplative frown. The estate's thick morning mist curled across the hedgerows like restless spectres, softening the edges of the world and muting all sound. It was a landscape built for secrets, mon Dieu, perhaps even for murder. Behind Poirot, Chief Inspector Mallory shuffled impatiently. "So, Poirot, what do you make of last night's statements?" Poirot lifted a finger. "Patience, my friend. The mind must be allowed to settle, like a troubled lake. Only when the ripples calm may one see clearly the pebbles lying beneath. Mallory muttered something unpolite about pebbles. Poirot finally turned from the window. We must examine the exterior grounds at once. Bodies in locked studies do not simply acquire footprints by accident. Indeed, Mrs. Harwood's trembling revelation from the previous night echoed still. Footprints on the terrace outside the study, appearing after the storm had ceased, though no guest admitted being outdoors. Together they crossed the hall, where the servants moved with hushed unease. A murder infected a household with a particular silence, one heavy enough to feel. Out on the terrace, the mist thinned like breath under a lantern's glow. Mallory stooped instantly. There, just as she said. Poirot did not bend. He simply observed. Eyes small and bright as coins, footprints formed a short, peculiar trail, beginning near the ivy-covered wall and ending abruptly at the study's French doors. Fresh, clear impressions, boots with a worn heel, no more than a few hours old. But only one set. Poirot finally knelt, fingertips hovering above the closest print. He did not touch it. Size 9, perhaps 10, he murmured. A man's boot. The stride is deliberate, almost ceremonious. Mallory snorted. Boots, Poirot. Nothing ceremonious about mud. Mais non, you observe mud. Poirot observes intention. He tapped the edge of the footprint with his cane. See here, the pressure on the outer edge. Our visitor walks with a slight pronation. And note the angle. He approached the doors, not fled from them. So you're saying the killer came from outside, Mallory concluded. Not necessarily. Poirot rose smoothly. Only that someone wished to create the appearance of an approach. Footprints may be made by anyone, before or after a death. Mallory groaned. Or they're simply the killer coming to commit the murder. Poirot smiled mildly. Perhaps, but we shall not jump to conclusions, huh? That is how one trips. The mist began to lift further, revealing the distant outline of Amberley Village. Somewhere out there lay the solicitor's associates, enemies, and the secrets threading between them all. Poirot tapped his cane thoughtfully. Let us speak again with our 3 primary suspects. The truth, I think, is already stirring. She awaited them in the morning room, her thin fingers wrapped around a fragile teacup. She looked as if she had not slept, her eyes swollen, complexion waxy beneath her auburn curls. Miss Ainsworth, Poirot began gently, you told us yesterday that Mr. Whitcomb visited you last week with distressing accusations. He accused me of theft, she whispered, clutching the cup tighter. Falsified documents, missing funds, secret accounts in my name. Her voice cracked. He said he had proof, but I swear to you, I have done nothing. Mallory's expression hardened. You argued with him. I was defending myself. A surge of emotion broke through her composure. He threatened to ruin my career, but murder? No, I could never. Poirot observed her trembling hands for a moment. Tell me, mademoiselle, were you anywhere near the terrace last night? Her eyes darted upward. No, I went straight to my room. I didn't leave again. Poirot thanked her with a soft nod. But as he stepped away, her voice followed him in a low, shaken murmur. He was wrong about me, but someone else had more to fear than I did. The estate's master paced his study like a caged hound. His dressing gown hung loose, his face drained of all aristocratic distinction. I tell you both, he said tightly, the man was blackmailing me. Entirely out of his depth, yet bold as brass. Said he'd uncovered inconsistencies from an investment I handled years ago. Nonsense, all of it. Poirot folded his hands. And you did not consider it necessary to, how do you say, smooth matters with him? Harwood's eyes flashed. "Are you implying I killed him?" "Non," Poirot said softly. "I imply nothing. I merely observe that blackmail is a flame which burns all it touches." Harwood collapsed into a leather chair, head in his hands. "I argued with him, yes, days ago, but last night, no. I was in the billiard room with Mallory's constable until the storm cut the lights." Poirot tilted his head. "Yet someone visited the terrace. Do you own boots of size 10, Monsieur Harwood?" A pause, a long one. "Several pairs," Harwood admitted. "Half the men here do." "But one pair," Poirot murmured, "is more worn than the others, I suspect." A flicker of something like fear crossed Harwood's face. Clara met them outside the stables, her riding attire immaculate despite the early hour. She stroked the muzzle of a chestnut mare, her expression calm, composed, unusually so. "Mr. Whitcomb was a nuisance," she said plainly. "He accused my brother-in-law of financial mismanagement and tried to drag me into it, but I had no quarrel with him personally." Mallory scoffed. "You stood to inherit a considerable sum from the Harwood estate should certain investments fall through." Clara's smile was thin. "Inspector, wealth changes hands every day. It is rarely cause for murder." Poirot stepped closer, peering at her boots, tall riding boots, clean, too clean for a misty morning. "You did not ride today?" "No," she replied. A beat later, "Why do you ask?" Poirot merely smiled. Upon returning to the terrace, Poirot knelt once more beside the mysterious footprints. Mallory stood over him, arms crossed. "Well, what now?" Poirot lifted a tiny object pinched delicately between two fingers, a small shard of dark brittle material. Mallory frowned. "What is that?" "Ah," Poirot said softly, "that is the question." He held it up to the weak sunlight. "Part of a heel plate, broken recently, likely from the very boot that made these footprints." Mallory's eyes widened. "So we look for a damaged boot?" Poirot straightened, a triumphant glimmer in his gaze. "Not just a damaged boot, mon ami, a deliberately damaged one," Mallory spluttered. "Why on earth would someone—" Poirot pointed to the prints. "These impressions were made with too much care, each step placed with near-perfect spacing. A natural walk is never so symmetrical." Mallory stared at him. "You're saying someone staged the prints?" Poirot lifted his cane, with calculated precision. The mist cleared fully now, revealing Amberley Court in stark morning clarity. But Poirot felt the deeper fog settling, the fog woven from lies, motives, secrets. He leaned close to Mallory and whispered, "And I believe the murderer wished us to believe they approached the study. In truth," he paused, "they wished to hide that they were already inside it when the solicitor died." Mallory inhaled sharply. Poirot smiled, a small knowing curve of the lips. "Come, Inspector, the footprints tell a story, but it is not the one they wish us to hear. The investigation was no longer merely a question of who killed Arthur Whitcomb. It was now a question of who wished to deceive Hercule Poirot." Chapter 4. The Letter That Should Not Exist. By late afternoon, Amberley Court had settled into a brittle hush, the kind that accompanies a house waiting for truth or disaster. Poirot, ever immaculate, sat in the grand library, a chamber of carved oak shelves and sombre oil portraits, whose painted eyes seemed to observe the proceedings with quiet judgment. Before him lay the case files collected by Mallory's constable, each neatly stacked, each promising a fragment of clarity. Yet it was not the files that drew Poirot's attention. It was the letter. Earlier that morning, Mrs. Harwood, pale, shaken, and clutching a stack of correspondence, had approached Poirot with trembling hands. Amid the solicitor's portfolio of estate papers, a single envelope had been tucked inside. A letter addressed to Hercule Poirot himself, written in Arthur Whitcomb's deliberate, slanted handwriting. Mallory still paced across the library carpet like an agitated watchdog. "You're certain Whitcomb wrote it? Before he died?" Poirot held up the envelope with delicate fingertips. "But of course. The ink, the paper, the monogram, hey, even the faint scent of his particular soap. No forgery, no doubt." Mallory scratched his cheek. "But why write to you? And more importantly, why not send it?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. Ah, that is the mystery within the mystery. He opened the letter with the same care a surgeon reserves for delicate instruments. Mallory leaned over his shoulder. The writing was brief, urgent. "Monsieur Poirot, if anything happens to me, know that I have uncovered a deceit far greater than embezzlement. Someone close to me, closer than even I feared, means to silence me. I beg you, come to Amberley Court with haste." A.W. Mallory exhaled sharply. He absolutely knew someone wanted him dead. Poirot nodded slowly. Oui. And more interesting still, he expected that someone to succeed. The inspector frowned. "But this doesn't help us narrow down the killer. Any of the three suspects could have been close to him in some way." Poirot tapped the letter. "Non, mon ami. Whitcomb said closer than even I feared. He implies not professional closeness, but emotional, personal, private." Mallory blinked. "Meaning?" Poirot's fingers steepled. "Meaning the killer was someone he trusted deeply." The room grew cold. As Poirot folded the letter, a soft knock echoed through the room. The butler, Mr. Dalrymple, entered with stiff composure. "Sir, I believe there is something you should see." He led them through the labyrinthine hallways to the small, dim-lit records room where the staff kept estate logs. Among the ledgers, Dalrymple produced a small locked box. "This belonged to Mr. Whitcomb," he explained. "He left it with me 2 days ago. He asked me to keep it safe and to hand it over should anything befall him." Mallory's brows shot up. "Why didn't you say this earlier?" Dalrymple bowed his head. "Forgive me, sir. Mr. Whitcomb was a private man. I did not wish to betray his trust until I was certain of the seriousness." Poirot gave a reassuring nod. "You did well. Now let us see what secrets he guarded so tightly." The butler produced a key from his waistcoat. Inside the box lay a thin bundle of papers, tied with twine, and a small brass object. Mallory lifted it. "What on earth is this?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A heel plate, matching the broken piece we found on the terrace." Mallory stared. "So Whitcomb had it. Why?" Poirot answered softly, "Because he found the damaged boot before he died." The significance fell like a stone into deep water. Whitcomb had discovered his killer. Poirot spread the papers across the table. They were financial statements, several of them showing transfers, hidden accounts, and forged signatures. But not from Lydia Ainsworth, not from Edward Harwood, not from Clara Winston. Mallory leaned in. "Who the hell's account is this?" Poirot pointed gently to the name. Mallory froze. "No, that's impossible." The account belonged to Mrs. Eleanor Harwood, Whitcomb's longtime confidant, a quiet, unassuming woman with delicate manners and soft smiles. Poirot nodded. There it is, the betrayal he feared most. Mallory rubbed his temples. But how? Why? She barely spoke to him, except about estate matters. Poirot's voice lowered. She spoke to him more than you know. Mrs. Harwood and the solicitor shared a long-standing friendship. a closeness her husband never suspected. She managed many household funds, quietly, discreetly. Whitcomb must have confronted her. And she panicked. Mallory stepped back. But that means she's the killer. Poirot raised a finger. No, do not run before you can walk, Inspector. We have proof of fraud, but not murder. Yet he looked troubled. Deeply. Poirot requested a private discussion with Mrs. Harwood, and found her sitting in the conservatory among drooping orchids. Her eyes were red, yet her posture remained elegant, controlled. Madame, Poirot began gently, you were close to Mr. Whitcomb. Her lips trembled. Yes, and now he is gone. Poirot placed the letter on the table between them. She stared at it, horrified. He asked for your help, Poirot continued softly. He trusted you. Tears welled in her eyes. I did not kill him, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot's face remained unreadable. Then tell me, why did you deceive him? Her breath caught. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, I made mistakes, she whispered. Misplaced funds. A debt I could not explain to my husband. Arthur helped me hide it, until he refused to continue. He said he could no longer be part of it. So you threatened him? She shook her head vehemently. Never. I begged him. That is all. Poirot watched her carefully. She was distraught, but not cunning, not controlled like a murderer must be. Still, fear lingered behind her eyes. Fear, not guilt. Someone else had manipulated her mistakes. And Poirot felt the pieces shift again. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Poirot returned to the terrace where the morning's footprints had begun the unravelling. He stood alone, gazing at the pattern, the symmetry, the unnatural precision. Whitcomb had found the broken heel plate, then hidden it. Someone else had created these footprints. He replayed the suspect's movements, their alibis, their lies, their fears. Then he saw it, a detail so quiet, so minor, that he had dismissed it entirely. But now it glowed like a lantern in fog. Poirot stepped back, eyes widening, not in surprise, but in triumph. Ah, he whispered, so that is your game. He looked toward the stables, toward a certain suspect who wore boots too clean for a morning walk, someone accustomed to manipulating appearance, someone with the skill and the nerve to stage a scene. Poirot's voice lowered to a soft murmur. The killer is clever, très clever, but not clever enough for Hercule Poirot. Chapter 5. Shadows in the Stables. The stables of Amberley Court lay at the far edge of the estate, half swallowed by a thicket of yew trees. By the time Poirot stepped inside, the late evening sun had faded to a coppery glow, casting long skeletal shadows across the floorboards. Horses whickered softly in their stalls, their breaths creating small puffs of mist in the cool air. Poirot moved with measured elegance, inspecting each stall, each corner, each innocent-looking object. Nothing in a stable was ever truly innocent, not when murder hovered about the estate like a dark perfume. He paused at the tack wall. Saddles hung neatly, polished to military perfection. Brushes were arrayed in rigid lines. And there, among the riding boots, he found what he expected. One pair was missing. Not just missing, recently removed. Poirot stepped closer, fingertips brushing over the faint outlines left in dust. Yes. A pair lifted hurriedly, and not long ago. Footsteps sounded behind him. Clara Winston entered with the fluid grace of someone who had lived her life on horseback. Her riding jacket was immaculate, her posture precise, her expression composed, too composed. Monsieur Poirot, she said calmly, I was told you were looking for me. Oui, Mademoiselle Winston, Poirot replied, hands clasped behind him. "You ride often, I see." "Every morning," she said. "It clears the mind." "Yet today your boots were spotless. Curious, no?" A faint flicker crossed her face. Gone almost instantly. "You notice that? I clean them each night. It is habit." Poirot nodded politely. "And where are they now?" "In my room," she replied without hesitation. Poirot's brow arched. "Then what of the pair that is missing from this stable?" Clara blinked. A heartbeat too long. "I would not know. Perhaps Harwood's son borrowed them before he returned to London." Poirot smiled gently. "There is no Harwood's son, mademoiselle." She froze. Before Clara could speak, the stable-master, a stout man with honest mud-stained boots, appeared in the doorway. "Pardon, sir," he said to Poirot, "but if it's about the missing boots, I can explain." Clara's jaw tightened. Poirot inclined his head. "Please," the stable-master wiped sweat from his brow. "Miss Winston asked me to clean a pair last night. Mud caked all the way up the sides. Looked like someone had walked halfway to the village and back." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "And where are those boots now?" "In her room, I suppose," he said. "I left them outside her door this morning." Poirot turned slowly toward Clara. "Mademoiselle," he said softly, "you claimed you had not ridden today, yet your boots were spotless. And the ones used last night, they are covered in mud." Clara's eyes narrowed. "What are you implying?" "That you were outside last night during the storm," Poirot replied, "and that you walked through the gardens, near the terrace, and perhaps even to the study doors." Clara stiffened, spine straightening like a whip. "I did go outside," she admitted finally, voice tight, "but not to the study. I needed air. I took a walk, only that." Poirot stepped nearer. "And did you create footprints, Mademoiselle Winston?" Clara's eyes widened, outrage flaring briefly. "Certainly not." Poirot watched her carefully. Yet her denial rang too quickly, too forcefully, almost rehearsed. Poirot seated himself on a small wooden bench, folding his hands delicately. "Mademoiselle, you are a woman accustomed to discipline. Precision, appearances, yet appearances, they can be misleading." Clara crossed her arms. "Spare me the lecture, Monsieur Poirot. Say what you believe." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "You stood to gain much from the solicitor's death." Clara inhaled sharply. "My gain is irrelevant. I did not kill him." But it is not irrelevant," Poirot continued. "Edward Harwood's financial dealings were precarious. Had Whitcomb revealed certain mismanagements, the Harwood estate would fall into disarray, oui?" Clara said nothing. And in such disarray, who would step forward to guide matters, perhaps even influence? The future of the inheritance? Her eyes flickered. Not guilt, but something akin to fear. Poirot pressed softly. "You believed Whitcomb's accusations would ruin your family's financial stability. You argued with him." Clara looked away. "I argued, yes. He threatened the estate, but I did not harm him." Poirot tilted his head. "Then why create the illusion that someone approached the study?" "I didn't." Poirot's gaze sharpened. Clara swallowed, voice trembling now. "I only walk the grounds, that is all." For the first time since he met her, her composure cracked. Poirot rose. "You are lying about something, Mademoiselle Winston. Whether it is murder, or merely your involvement, that remains to be seen." She turned away sharply. "Believe what you will." Poirot watched her leave the stables, posture rigid, steps purposeful, a woman retreating, not advancing. Poirot waited until her figure disappeared beyond the yew trees before turning back into the stable. The stable-master lingered awkwardly. "Sir," he said quietly, "there's something else. Something I didn't want to say in front of her." Poirot gestured for him to continue. "Last night, near midnight, I heard voices out here. A man and a woman arguing. I didn't see clearly, but the woman," he hesitated, "she sounded like Miss Winston." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And the man?" "I'm not certain, but it could have been Mr. Harwood." Poirot absorbed this silently. "Did they mention Mr. Whitcomb?" The stable master nodded slowly. "Aye. She told the man that Whitcomb knew too much and had to be stopped. I thought she meant legally. I swear it, sir." Poirot placed a comforting hand on the man's shoulder. "You did right to tell me." He climbed the ladder to the hayloft, where a square patch of disturbed hay caught his eye. Beneath it, he found exactly what he expected: a man's boot, size 10, heel plate broken. Poirot held it up to the dying light, his moustache twitching with satisfaction. "Ah," he whispered, "now the story becomes clearer. Someone had hidden the incriminating boot here. Someone clever. Someone who knew the search would begin soon. But the boot was not Clara's, nor Harwood's. It belonged to someone with access to the stables, someone who could manipulate all three suspects, someone who had the perfect vantage point to plant false clues." Poirot descended from the loft with a grave expression. "The murderer," he murmured, "is watching us all, from much closer than we realized." Poirot stepped out into the evening air, the cool wind tugging at his coat. The estate loomed dark behind him, its windows glowing faintly like watchful eyes. He tucked the boot under his arm. "Now," he said softly, "it is time to unravel the final deception." The stage was set. The killer's careful web was beginning to fray, and Hercule Poirot was following. Issue the thread, straight to the heart of Amberley Court. Chapter 6. The housemaid's secret night returned to Amberley Court like a velvet shroud, heavy and suffocating. Lamps glowed dimly in the corridor sconces as Poirot walked with deliberate steps toward the servants' wing, the unease inside the estate thick enough to taste. Suspects lied, footprints deceived. And now, a boot hidden in the hayloft suggested a puppeteer more cunning than any of the three primary suspects. Yet Poirot felt the faint stirrings of truth, like a whisper brushing past his ear. He always trusted such whispers. He paused at the far end of the corridor, where a small door led to the service staircase. Light flickered beneath it, and soft movement, perhaps even careful breathing, reached him. Poirot tapped lightly. The door cracked open a few inches, revealing the anxious face of Annie Fletcher, the young housemaid who had served the Harwoods for over 5 years. Her eyes darted down the hall before she stepped back and allowed Poirot inside. The room was small, scarcely wider than a carriage, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a wooden chest at the foot. Annie twisted her apron between trembling fingers. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, "I thought you'd come." Poirot regarded her kindly. "Ah, and why, petite?" Her eyes shimmered with tears. Because I know something I should have told you sooner." Poirot folded his hands. "Then speak, mademoiselle. The truth will free the conscience." She hesitated, gripping the apron like a lifeline. "I cleaned Mr. Whitcomb's study every morning," Annie began, voice trembling. "I saw things, papers he tried to hide, letters he burned only halfway." Poirot leaned forward. "You found pieces of a letter, yes?" Her eyes widened. "How did you—" Poirot smiled gently. Whitcomb was a man under great strain, one who feared betrayal. It is only natural that he left traces even in his efforts to conceal them. Annie nodded. 3 weeks ago, I found scraps from a letter in the wastebasket. From Mrs. Harwood, she was begging him. begging him not to reveal something. She said it would destroy her. Poirot's expression softened. We know of her mismanaged funds. No, Annie whispered, it wasn't that. Poirot paused. Then what? Annie swallowed hard. She told him that someone in the house was threatening her, forcing her to sign papers, documents she didn't understand. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Not fraud, coercion. Who threatened her? Annie hesitated, fear choking her voice. I don't want to say. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low and reassuring. Child, a murderer walks this house. If you withhold the truth, you give him power. Tell me. Annie's voice cracked. It was Mr. Harwood. Poirot stared at her. But Annie wasn't finished. That night, the night Mr. Whitcomb died, I saw Mr. Harwood leave his room, but he wasn't alone. Poirot felt the world shift under his feet. Not alone. His voice was barely above a breath. Annie shook her head violently. He was with Clara Winston. Poirot closed his eyes. So they were working together. Annie's words tumbled out now in a frantic rush. They went toward the study. I heard them arguing earlier. Mr. Harwood said Whitcomb knew too much. Miss Winston said they had to act before he ruined everything. Poirot inhaled slowly. And afterward? They returned half an hour later, soaked from the rain. Miss Winston looked furious. Mr. Harwood kept wiping something from his hands. Poirot bowed his head. Merci, Annie. You have been very brave. But the housemaid's eyes filled with dread. Monsieur Poirot, she whispered, you don't understand, I'm afraid, because I also saw something else. Poirot's brows lifted. Tell me. Annie's voice dropped to the faintest whisper. I saw Miss Winston give something to Mr. Harwood, a small metal piece. She said, hide this before they find it. Poirot's heart tightened. The broken heel plate, he murmured. Annie nodded. Yes, the boot you found in the loft. They hid it together. Poirot felt a thrill of revelation, but only for a moment. Something didn't fit. Something vital. If Harwood and Winston conspired, why plant footprints leading to the study? Why create a false trail? And why was Whitcomb's letter addressed to Poirot? He paced slowly in Annie's narrow room, mind spiraling through possibilities. Then it struck him, sharp and undeniable. Poirot turned back to Annie. Mademoiselle, you saw Harwood and Winston leave the study area, but tell me, did you see either of them enter? Annie's brow furrowed. I'm not sure. I went to fetch linens. When I returned, the house was already dark. Poirot nodded. And when you saw them soaked, did they appear frightened, stricken, shocked? Annie thought for a moment. No, angry, yes, but not shaken. Poirot's moustache twitched. That was wrong, entirely wrong. Harwood was a nervous man. Murder would unmake him. Clara was cold, but not emotionless. Neither could walk from a killing without some sign of panic. But the killer had shown no panic, no fear, only calculation. Poirot whispered to himself, No, something is amiss. He turned sharply to Annie. One last question. When you found Mrs. Harwood crying earlier today, what did she tell you? Annie blinked. Only that she was afraid, that she didn't trust her husband anymore. Poirot froze. Her husband? Annie nodded. Yes. She said she feared he wasn't the man she thought. Poirot's breath caught. Not from shock, but from clarity. Everything snapped into place, the footprints, the hidden boot, the staged evidence, the forged financial papers, the manipulated fears, and Whitcomb's final message. Poirot murmured, Someone close to me, closer than even I feared. Whitcomb had not meant emotional closeness. He meant physical closeness. Someone with access to every room, every conversation, every secret. Poirot's eyes widened. "Annie," he whispered, "you are in grave danger. Do not leave this room." She stiffened, terrified. "Why? What's happening?" Poirot moved toward the door. "Because the murderer is not Harwood, nor Clara, nor even Madame Harwood." His hand tightened on the doorknob. "It is the one person who walks these halls unseen, the one with the freedom to hide objects, plant evidence, hear arguments, twist truths." Annie clapped a hand over her mouth. "The butler," she whispered. Poirot closed his eyes. "Dalrymple." Poirot stepped into the corridor, voice low and decisive. "The killer created chaos among the suspects, weaving lies so intricate they nearly blinded even Hercule Poirot. But now the masquerade ends." He walked with purpose toward the main staircase, each step echoing like a ticking clock. Dalrymple had been watching, listening, manipulating, and Poirot was coming. Chapter 7. The Shredded Truth. A low mist rolled across the gardens of Greyfriar Court as dawn broke with indifferent pale light. Inside the drawing room, Hercule Poirot stood perfectly still, his hands folded behind him, his gaze fixed on the fireplace as though its cold grate offered up revelations only he could detect. Chief Inspector Flint hovered impatiently nearby, rocking on his heels. Miss Estelle Harcourt sat stiffly on the velvet sofa, and Lionel Tremaine stood close to the window, tapping a nervous rhythm on the glass pane. Poirot lifted one hand. "Mes amis, before we proceed further, I must trouble you to listen with the utmost attention, for last night pieces of a puzzle finally drifted into place." Flint crossed his arms. "Let's hope those pieces are clearer than the confounded mess of this case." Poirot ignored him. "At precisely midquarter midnight, I discovered something rather intriguing, something Miss Harcourt neglected to mention." Estelle's face blanched. "I neglected to mention? Oui. The note you claimed to have found among Mr. Alderton's correspondence, the one you said instructed him to meet someone in the library on the evening of his death." Poirot inclined his head. "It was a forgery, a very careful forgery, but one that bore the faint scent of lavender." Lionel blinked. "Lavender?" Poirot smiled faintly. "A detail too delicate for the English nose, but not for Hercule Poirot. A lady's perfume, Miss Harcourt's perfume, if I am not mistaken." Estelle's breath hitched, her gloved hands curling. "That is absurd, Monsieur Poirot. I had no reason, no earthly reason, to forge anything." Poirot stepped closer. "No? Then perhaps you might explain why Mr. Alderton withdrew his offer to support your charitable trust only days before his death." Her lips parted, then closed again. Lionel shot her a look. "Estelle, you didn't tell me that." She straightened her back with brittle dignity. "Because it was irrelevant." Flint snorted. "Everything's relevant when someone ends up dead." Poirot's voice softened. "Mademoiselle, you are not the murderer, but your deception has obscured the path I must follow. The forged note was a red herring, meant to direct attention away from the actual meeting that occurred that night, one far more clandestine." The room shifted with unease. Poirot retrieved a small paper bag from the table. "Inside this bag are the remnants of a burnt document I found in the hearth of the library. Most of it is beyond salvage, but a few words remained. Enough words, in fact, to suggest the true purpose of Mr. Alderton's last meeting." Flint stepped forward sharply. "What words?" Poirot withdrew a tweezed fragment. "The phrase, 'Articles of Partnership,' and another fragment bearing the signature L-Tray. Ix." Lionel stiffened. I can explain that." "Très bien," Poirot murmured. "Let us hear this explanation." Lionel swallowed hard. Alderton and I were discussing a joint practice. He was tired of the drudgery of minor cases and wanted to expand. He asked me to join him, and we were drafting the documents together. But that particular version," he gestured helplessly toward the ash, "was one he decided to discard." Poirot arched a brow. "Discard by burning? It was his habit," Lionel said quickly. "He burned drafts regularly. It meant nothing sinister." Poirot continued to regard him with unreadable calm. Estelle shifted. "Lionel would never hurt Henry. They were close, closer than most colleagues." Flint grunted. "Close enough to quarrel. I heard from the constables you two had a heated exchange the day before Alderton died." Lionel exhaled, defeated. "Yes, we argued. He accused me of lacking ambition, of relying too heavily on him. It stung, but that does not make me a killer." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Perhaps not. Still, it is curious, n'est-ce pas, that Mr. Alderton met with someone that night, someone he trusted enough to bring into the library, the very room where he kept confidential papers, someone he believed would protect his interests." The room fell silent. Poirot turned toward the cabinet nestled in the corner. "Last night, I also discovered this." He opened the cabinet door. Inside lay a small leather-bound ledger, partly concealed by a stack of outdated newspapers. "A hidden journal of sorts, Mr. Alderton's private accounting." Flint frowned. "He kept a second ledger?" Poirot nodded. "Oui, and the contents are most enlightening." He flipped open the book. "Here, repeated entries labelled simply Client S, substantial withdrawals, and beside each, not a description, but a single initial." He tapped the page with a fingertip. "F." Chief Inspector Flint blinked. "F? As in?" "Yes, mon ami, as in Flint." The colour drained from the inspector's face. The room froze. Lionel stared at him, appalled. "Flint, you were taking money from him?" Flint's jaw tightened. "I never took a penny. I don't know what that blasted ledger is, but Alderton must have—" Poirot raised a hand. "Patience. I am not accusing you. If anything, these entries suggest Alderton was paying someone under your initial, perhaps to throw suspicion elsewhere. Or perhaps," he leaned in, "to disguise the true recipient." Estelle spoke faintly. "Then the F might not be Flint." Poirot closed the ledger with a soft thud. "Just so." He walked slowly to the centre of the room. "Suspects abound. Motives swirl like the fog outside. A forged note, burnt drafts, secret payments, hidden partnerships. Yet, among these threads, one is strong enough to pull the whole tapestry apart." Lionel hesitated. "And that thread is—" Poirot looked at each of them in turn, his gaze sharp and glittering. "There is one person who had access to all the rooms, one who could easily move papers, forge notes, and approach Mr. Alderton without raising suspicion, one who benefited most directly from his death." Flint barked. "Well, who?" Poirot folded his hands neatly. "That, mes amis, I shall reveal once I verify one final detail. Inspector Flint, if you would accompany me to the study. There is something I require, not from the crime scene, but from your pocket." Flint's eyebrows shot up. "My pocket? Oui, something you picked up without realizing its significance." The inspector stared at him, a mix of confusion and reluctant trust. "Fine, but you'd better explain yourself." Poirot nodded once. "In due course." He turned toward the others. "I suggest you all remain here. Do not wander. The truth is nearly unravelled, and the slightest disturbance could compromise the revelation." As Poirot and Flint left the room, the heavy door closed behind them with a soft but decisive click. Estelle exhaled shakily. Lionel paced in tight circles. The fog outside thickened, pressing against the windows like a silent, watching presence. And upstairs, somewhere in the heart of Greyfriar Court, Hercule Poirot prepared to expose the secret that had condemned Henry Alderton to death. The next chapter would bring reckoning. Chapter 8. The Inspector's Pocket. The corridor outside the drawing-room lay steeped in half-light. Its wallpaper, a faded damask that caught the glow of the sconces like dim embers. Hercule Poirot walked with measured steps, his patent leather shoes whispering across the carpet-runner. Chief Inspector Flint followed with the look of a man who would much rather have barked orders than be led like an errant schoolboy. Poirot paused only when they reached the study, the room adjoining the library, and the nearest Poirot could come to privacy without rekindling suspicion. He opened the door and motioned for Flint to enter. Flint complied, rigid as a bayonet. "Now then," he muttered, "what's this business about my pocket?" If this is some trick, Poirot raised a hand sharply. "Non, mon ami, no trick, only observation." He approached the inspector with the solemn air of a priest preparing to hear confession. "Empty your right coat pocket, s'il vous plaît." Flint's brows drew into a thundercloud, but he complied, fishing into the pocket and withdrawing a crumpled handkerchief, a stub of pencil, and a folded scrap of paper. Poirot smiled with delicate triumph. "There, that paper, may I?" Flint handed it over. "I don't even remember picking that up. Found it on the floor in the library last night, I think. Thought it was rubbish." Poirot unfolded it very slowly, as though afraid the fragile paper might dissipate into dust. But the ink upon it had survived, faded, faint, but legible. Alderton's handwriting. Flint exhaled. "What is it?" Poirot read silently, his expression tightening, then easing into deep contemplation. "It is half of a note, torn violently, most likely in frustration." He held it up. "Cannot continue these payments. I have done all I can to protect your position, but you persist in—" Poirot lowered the page. "The rest, as you see, is missing." Flint frowned. "Payments? That ledger of his again?" "Indeed, but he was paying someone, and not me." Poirot nodded. "Of that I am now certain. You, Chief Inspector, have many faults, but venality is not one of them." Flint blinked, unsure whether to be offended or pleased. Poirot paced the study, fingers steepled. "There is something, how do you English say, on the tip of the tongue, a connection waiting to be made." Flint shoved his hands in his pockets. If Alderton was paying someone, then who, and why? Poirot did not answer at once. Instead, he turned toward the window, overlooking the fog-shrouded courtyard. In the ledger, the recipient was concealed with the letter F, a misdirection as we now understand. So we must consider who else in this house might be associated with such an initial, not by name perhaps, but by title, by status, by function. Flint's brow furrowed. "Function!" Poirot snapped his fingers. "Fonctionnaire, a servant, someone whose role begins with v—" Flint startled. "The footman. Exactement." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Mr. Charles Fenwick." Silence pooled like spilled ink. Flint eventually said, "Fenwick, that lad barely speaks above a whisper." Poirot gave a soft chuckle. "Often the quietest of people have the most to hide." He turned the fragment over in his fingers. There is more. This note, its handwriting is Alderton's, but the tear across it suggests haste, even fear, and consider. Fenwick was among the first to discover the body. It would have been easy for him to remove incriminating scraps, except this one, which he evidently dropped in his haste. Poirot straightened. "Come, Inspector. We must speak with the footman at once." Flint squared his shoulders. "Right. They strode out of the study, the corridor swallowing their footsteps as the fog pressed hungrily against the windows. They found Fenwick not in the servants' wing, but in the alcove near the back staircase, polishing a silver tray with rigid, mechanical strokes. He started violently when he saw them. "Monsieur Poirot, Inspector Flint, is something wrong, sirs?" Poirot smiled with maddening gentleness. "Nothing at all, Monsieur Fenwick. Only we require clarity." He held up the paper scrap. "Tell me, why was this in your possession?" Fenwick's throat bobbed. I don't know what that is." Flint barked. "Don't lie to us." Fenwick flinched. The tray trembled in his hands. Poirot stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Monsieur, listen to me. Lies, how do they say, are the tools of those who wish to complicate what is already complicated. I wish the truth. It is far simpler." Fenwick stared at the paper, his face draining of colour. "I didn't kill Mr. Alderton," he whispered. "I swear it." "That," Poirot said lightly, "remains to be seen." Fenwick's breath hitched. I only did what I was told." Poirot froze. Flint's eyes widened. "By whom?" Poirot asked softly. Fenwick shook his head frantically, tears pricking his eyes. "I can't say, I can't. They said they'd ruin me. They said—" Poirot touched his shoulder. "Calm yourself. Who threatened you?" Fenwick swallowed. "I was delivering letters for Mr. Alderton, private letters. They weren't addressed through the post. He made me swear I'd handle them discreetly. But someone found out." Poirot murmured, "Someone in this house." Fenwick nodded, choking. "Yes." Flint stepped forward. "And this person coerced you?" Fenwick nodded again, harder this time. "They said they'd accuse me of theft, that I'd lose my position forever. They made me give them Alderton's private correspondence whenever they asked. I didn't know what they wanted with it, I swear." Poirot pressed. "And on the night of his death?" Fenwick closed his eyes. "I fetched a letter from his desk because they demanded it. I left it where I was told to, in the library." Poirot stilled. "Where in the library?" Fenwick hesitated. "Behind the ledger cabinet." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The perfect place to retrieve it, unseen." Flint's jaw tightened. "And after that?" "I left," Fenwick whispered. "I swear I left. When I came back later, Mr. Alderton was already dead." Poirot exchanged a look with Flint, a look pulsing with revelation. Poirot stepped back, inhaled deeply, and said, "Merci, Monsieur Fenwick. You have been most helpful. Return to your duties." Fenwick looked bewildered. "Am I not under arrest?" Poirot smiled kindly. "No, you are merely under suspicion. A subtle but important distinction." Fenwick departed, trembling. Flint exhaled heavily. "So he was being manipulated, but who's the puppet master?" Poirot gave a small, knowing nod. "The answer, Chief Inspector, now stands before us with near certainty." He tapped the torn note. "The person Alderton could no longer protect, the person receiving payments, the person who coerced a servant, forged letters, burnt documents, and engineered a false trail." Flint's breath caught. "Who?" Poirot smiled, softly, coldly, triumphantly. "Come, mon ami, the denouement awaits, and all shall be revealed in the next chapter." He turned toward the stairs, his silhouette framed by the fog-blurred window, as though carved from shadow. Flint hurried after him. At last, the noose of truth had begun to tighten. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The drawing-room had become a theatre of tension. Every occupant a wary actor awaiting the rise of the final curtain. The fog outside pressed against the windows like an eager audience, hungry for revelation. Lionel Tremaine stood near the hearth, tapping the mantelpiece as though Morse coding his anxiety into the wood. Miss Estelle Harcourt kept rigid poise in the armchair, her gloved hands folded so tightly the knuckles showed white beneath the silk. When the door opened at last, every head jerked toward it. Hercule Poirot entered with deliberate calm, Chief Inspector Flint close behind him. The detective's gaze swept the room with the faintest glimmer of triumph, tempered by the gravity of what was to come. "Mes amis," Poirot began, closing the door behind him. "The moment approaches when the veil shall be lifted, but first we must address certain inconsistencies that have lingered like a sour note in a fine composition." Lionel stiffened. "You've found the killer?" Poirot inclined his head. "Oui. But the truth requires context, for murder is seldom a simple affair. It is a web woven from fear, greed, desperation, and opportunity." He moved to the center of the room, planting himself like a conductor before an orchestra. Flint stood at his shoulder, grim, silent, prepared. Poirot raised the torn scrap of Alderton's note for all to see. "Behold the final fragment of Mr. Alderton's own words. In this note, he states his refusal to continue payments to a certain individual, payments made in secrecy, payments disguised within his private ledger, marked only by a misleading initial." Estelle frowned. "Yes, that initial, F. But you said it was not Inspector Flint." Poirot smiled faintly. "Correct. But it was someone who wished to make it appear so. Someone who understood that the faintest shadow upon a man in authority would cast doubt far and wide," Flint muttered. "A damn clever setup." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Quite." He turned toward Estelle. "Mademoiselle Harcourt, earlier you forged a note. A foolish act, yes, but not a murderous one. You acted from wounded pride and desperation for your charity. Your perfume betrayed you, but your soul did not. You are guilty of vanity and secrecy, but not of homicide." Estelle bowed her head, relief flooding her expression. Poirot turned to Lionel Tremaine next. "As for you, Monsieur Tremaine, your partnership with Alderton was indeed fraught. You quarrelled, you doubted each other. Yet your greatest flaw is not violence, but insecurity. You burn with ambition, but you are no killer." Lionel sagged against the mantel, as though the verdict of innocence had been a weight lifted. Poirot took a slow, measured breath. "That leaves one other person. One who has woven themselves through this investigation with quiet ease. One who forged letters in silence, coerced the footman Fenwick, burned documents, created false trails, and disguised payments under misleading marks." He moved toward the window, hands clasped behind him. The person Mr. Alderton was protecting, until he resolved to stop. The room held its breath. Flint tensed like a man ready to spring. Poirot turned, his eyes sharp as cut glass. "Lady Beatrice Harcourt." A stunned silence followed. Sharp, painful, absolute. Then Estelle gasped. "My stepmother! Impossible! She has been bedridden for days. She barely leaves her room." Poirot's eyebrow lifted. "Ah, mademoiselle, that is what you were told, and what you readily believed. Yet I have observed Lady Harcourt myself. Her illness is an illusion, a performance most convincing to those predisposed to worry." Lionel shook his head. "But why? Why would she kill Henry Alderton?" Poirot walked calmly to the small escritoire near the corner, pulling open a drawer. Inside lay several envelopes bearing the Harcourt crest, each slit open with surgical precision, because, Poirot said softly, Lady Harcourt has been embezzling from the Harcourt estate for years. Mr. Alderton, acting as solicitor to the family, discovered discrepancies. At first, he protected her out of pity. Later, She paid him for his silence. He tapped the drawer. These envelopes contain copies of withdrawals Alderton made, with Lady Harcourt's signature expertly forged to match bank documents the lady herself provided. Fenwick told us the truth. He delivered letters, but he did not read their contents, and he delivered them directly to Lady Harcourt's chambers. Estelle trembled. She told me they were letters about charitable business. Poirot nodded sympathetically. A lie, mademoiselle, and a convenient one. Flint stepped forward. Where is Lady Harcourt now? Poirot's expression darkened. She is here. A soft sound echoed from the shadowed doorway. All eyes snapped toward it. Lady Beatrice Harcourt stood in the threshold, no longer appearing frail or bedridden. Her posture was straight, her face pale but composed, her eyes glittering with cold resentment. So, she said evenly, you've worked it out. Estelle staggered to her feet. Stepmother! How? Why? Lady Harcourt raised a hand. Spare me your naivete, Estelle. You have lived your life insulated from consequence. I have not. Poirot stepped toward her. Madame, the game is over. She gave him a tight smile. It ended the moment Henry Alderton decided to betray me. Poirot spoke softly. He sought to end the payments, oui. But he also intended to advise your family trustees, so that you might be spared public disgrace. For the first time, Lady Harcourt's mask faltered. He pitied me, she whispered. He pitied me, after everything I did to survive. Poirot nodded gently. Pity can wound as deeply as blame. Her composure hardened again. I confronted him. I begged him for more time. He refused. He said he would reveal everything. And in that moment, my desperation became action. Flint stepped forward, hand on his cuffs. Lady Beatrice Harcourt, you are under arrest for the murder. Wait, Poirot said softly. Flint paused mid-step. Poirot addressed Lady Harcourt with an odd tenderness. Madame, did you kill him with intent, or was it an act of blind panic? Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I don't know. He shouted. I shouted. He tried to leave. I grabbed his arm. He stumbled. His head struck the corner of the desk. Her voice cracked. I didn't mean to. But when I saw what had happened, I knew it was the end. Poirot's nod was slow, grave. You staged the crime scene. You forged an intruder. You burned documents. You used Fenwick to conceal your actions. A terrible chain of sins born from a single moment of fear. Lady Harcourt nodded, resigned. Flint stepped forward again, but she did not resist. Poirot closed his eyes for a brief moment, a silent tribute to the tragedy of human frailty. When he opened them, he said quietly, It is done. And outside, as though responding to the revelation, the fog finally began to lift. Chapter 10. The denouement at Amberley Court. The morning sun had begun to break through the dissipating fog, casting a pale, golden light across the sprawling lawns of Amberley Court. The air was crisp, sharp, carrying the scent of wet earth and the faint tang of smoke from last night's hearth fires. Inside the drawing-room, a profound silence hung, only broken by the soft ticking of the grandfather clock, as if time itself were hesitant to resume after the revelations of the preceding night. Hercule Poirot sat in his usual chair, back perfectly straight, hands folded over his lap. Chief Inspector Flint stood near the doorway, still processing the confession of Lady Beatrice Harcourt. Estelle Harcourt, pale but composed, lingered near the hearth, while Lionel Tremaine paced, muttering fragments of disbelief under his breath. Poirot began softly, his voice carrying the weight of finality. Mes amis, the case of Mr. Henry Alderton is now concluded. Yet before you can fully comprehend the events, I must recount them in their entirety. For only by understanding the chain of cause and effect can one see how tragedy unfolded at Amberley Court. He paused, allowing his words to settle like dew. Lady Beatrice Harcourt, motivated by fear of exposure, confronted Mr. Alderton in his study. Her intent was initially to plead for continued silence regarding the discrepancies in her management of the estate. But desperation overcame caution. The argument escalated. Mr. Alderton, the man of integrity and courage, refused her demands. In the ensuing struggle, he fell and struck his head against the corner of the desk. Death was instantaneous. Estelle gasped softly. It was an accident, then. Poirot's gaze was kind but firm. A terrible accident, yes, but in the aftermath, choices were made which transformed an accident into a deception. Lady Harcourt staged a false trail, forged letters, and coerced the footman Fenwick to manipulate perception. Each act compounded the gravity of her initial mistake. Flint stepped closer. So the footprints, the forged notes, the missing ledger pages, they were all deliberate misdirection. Poirot inclined his head. Oui, Inspector. The devil lies in details, and in this instance, those details nearly obscured the truth entirely. The perpetrator sought to control the narrative of the crime, weaving confusion with cunning skill. Poirot's eyes shifted toward Lionel Tremaine. Monsieur Tremaine, your quarrel with Mr. Alderton was unfortunate timing, but it was never malicious in intent. Your ambition and frustrations provided excellent red herrings, yet your conscience remains clear. Lionel exhaled shakily. Thank heavens! Poirot's gaze softened toward Estelle. And mademoiselle, your forged note was an act of panic and pride, not malice. You sought to influence events for a charitable cause, not to harm. Your part, though misguided, does not render you a criminal. Estelle nodded, relief and residual guilt mingling on her face. Poirot's gaze then fell upon Lady Beatrice, who sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly. Madame, the law will now take its course. Yet it is important to understand your actions, though driven by fear, were part of a larger human frailty. Greed, pride, fear, and desperation intersected to create this tragedy. You are responsible, yes, but you are also a victim of your own fears. Lady Beatrice lowered her gaze, her face pale, lips pressed tightly together. I understand, Monsieur Poirot. I accept the consequences. Poirot rose, walking to the window. He gestured to the garden where the fog had lifted, revealing the manicured grounds and the stately architecture of the estate. Observe, mes amis. Just as the morning sun reveals the landscape hidden by night and mist, truth eventually emerges from confusion and deceit. All things, no matter how carefully concealed, are eventually illuminated, Flint muttered. You make it sound almost poetic, Poirot. Poirot's small smile was dry but appreciative. Life itself is poetry, Inspector, even when it is tragic. He returned to his chair, resuming his composed posture. Now, a few final points. Fenwick, the footman, was manipulated. His role, though unwitting, was crucial in the deception. He followed orders, never understanding their full import. The moral: innocence may be complicit without intent if one is coerced by fear. Flint nodded, though his jaw remained tight. Poirot then addressed everyone in the room. As for Mr. Alderton, he remains a figure of integrity whose decisions and caution delayed the exposure of wrongdoing, yet ultimately failed to prevent tragedy. He protected secrets and trusted wrongly, a fatal miscalculation in the hands of someone unscrupulous. Lady Beatrice's lips quivered, her fingers tightening. He was too honest for his own good. Poirot's nod was sombre. Indeed, and honesty, mes amis, can be as dangerous as deception in a world ruled by fear and ambition. He paused, eyes flicking to the clock. With these revelations, Amberley Court may finally begin to heal, though scars will remain. The tangled web of lies and deceit is now resolved. The guilty party identified, and those wrongly accused have been exonerated. Yet the weight of human frailty lingers, a reminder that morality and prudence are delicate and often insufficient shields against misfortune. Flint exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. Well, that's the lot then. Lady Beatrice will answer to the law. Estelle and Lionel are cleared, and the estate can proceed without further scandal. Poirot nodded. Oui, Inspector, and in this quiet, let us reflect upon the lesson this case imparts. Fear, greed, and deception may intertwine, but logic, observation, and conscience ultimately prevail. The human mind, when disciplined, can unravel even the most convoluted of intrigues. A brief silence settled over the room, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock. Outside, birds began to call, tentative and bright, as if heralding a new day. Poirot stood, smoothing the front of his jacket with precise hands. Mes amis, this is the end of the mystery. Amberley Court shall remember the events of this week, but truth has been restored. The guilty have been revealed, the innocent exonerated, and justice, though imperfect, will proceed. Estelle finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Without you, we would still be lost in doubt and suspicion. Poirot inclined his head, small smile playing upon his lips. It is my duty, mademoiselle, to serve truth and order wherever chaos reigns. And in that service I find satisfaction. Flint cleared his throat. Satisfaction indeed. Let's hope this is the last of Amberley Court surprises for some time. Poirot chuckled faintly. Ah, mon ami, the human heart is rarely so simple, but at least for today we may rest, knowing that clarity has returned where shadows once prevailed. The room relaxed. Even Lady Beatrice's eyes, though clouded with remorse, softened slightly. Amberley Court, for all its grandeur and secrets, had endured. And Hercule Poirot, ever vigilant, had untangled the web with methodical precision, illuminating the truth in a manner befitting both reason and conscience. As the occupants of the room went about their morning routines, there was a palpable sense of closure, an acknowledgement that though the world might always contain shadows, logic and observation could pierce the deepest darkness. Outside, the first rays of sunlight caught the dew upon the grass, sparkling like diamonds. A final reminder that truth, no matter how obscured, will eventually shine. And in the quiet corner of the drawing-room, Poirot allowed himself a small, satisfied smile, fingers steepled once more, contemplating the delicate, intricate human tapestry he had just unravelled.